are sharing. I'm watching all the names fly in and I'm just reading through them. I'm so grateful that y'all are here. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Griever's Guide to Mother's Day. This is the inaugural event for EOL's new Wander community. The Wander community is a space to gather as we all navigate grief. And through Wander, I, Alica Forneret, will be hosting this monthly event along with another monthly series called Grief Support to convene leaders and professionals and speakers in the death and dying spaces so that audiences like y'all can come and feel actively supported as you move through life after a death loss. Like I said, I am Alica Forneret. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a convener, a consultant, a speaker, an educator, all working in the grief space. I got into this work in 2016 after my mom, Deborah, died. And ever since, I have been actively working to amplify the resources and works of people like our guests today. You can learn more about me and my work at the links that Kaylee will throw into the chat, but most importantly, what you need to know about me is that I am here today to hold space for y'all and to hold space for these speakers. A little bit of housekeeping, because this is Zoom webinar, you'll only be able to see the faces of our speakers, but I encourage you to interact with us in a couple other ways. If you would like to ask questions in the chat, please feel free to throw them in. We will be doing a Q&A at the very end of this event in the last 10-15 minutes. So do not hesitate. If you have questions for any of the speakers specifically, you can throw them in. And if you would like to send them privately and directly to Kaylee, who is moderating this event with us and doing all of our tech and working in the background, wonderfully supportive of us, you can do that with Kaylee Cole. The second is that this video will be available as a recording after, and you'll be able to find more information about that in the follow-up email that you'll get and on the Wander community page on EOL, which we'll link to in the chat, and that you'll automatically be enrolled in as a part of joining this event in this community. And I need to share, and I'm compelled to share that I am operating my business and my work on the land of the Cahuilla and Tonga people. And I am here tonight in acknowledgement of my privilege that I have sitting in this office, in this home, on this earth, and in a house that I recently bought, but on land that I do not own. If you would like to learn more about where you're taking up space and the space that you are inhabiting, we'll throw a link in the chat about the native land that you are on. And I invite you to check that out and learn more about where you are sitting, working, moving, grieving in this season. So now that the housekeeping is done, tonight we're going to talk about Mother's Day. It's around the corner, and for those of us who have lost a mother or a mother figure, it can be quite a complicated holiday. Speaking for myself, this weekend and the week leading up to it can just be, I'll say it, weird. It can be complicated, it can be challenging, it can be beautiful and full of memories. And the first few years, I was really conflicted about what to do during this week and on actual Mother's Day. Did I owe it to my mom to celebrate? Do I have to do some kind of ritual? Do I have to go to a place? Do I have to stare at her picture all day? Do I need to cry? Do I need to laugh? Can I just wander around Canadian Tire and do nothing and look at random tidbits? The answer was yes. Really, it was from guidance from others, leaders in the grief space, books that I read, podcasts that I listened to, articles that I was reading, and guidance that my husband as a support system was seeking out, that I learned that whatever I am feeling this week or this weekend or the days after, it is fine. It is valid, and it is absolutely appropriate for me to do whatever I needed to do as long as it was safe for me. If I want to buy cake and buy flowers, that's great. If I want to stay in bed and watch Animal Planet, that's also fine. And what matters most, in my opinion, is that we are all validated on weeks like this. So tonight we're hosting this event in case like you feel that you need a little extra guidance from a few people who talk actively and openly about their moms and their mother figures. So now I'm going to introduce the wonderful human beings and guests that we have. So what I decided to do with this series is I'm going to introduce the guests, give you a little bit of the like factual info about their background. And then as the host, I feel like it is my responsibility to also share why I trusted these three leaders and speakers and guests to come into this space and provide their guidance. So I'll share a little bit about our relationship and why I invited them here today to speak to you and offer guidance to you. And then what I'm going to ask our guests to do is, before we get into the meat of the conversation, I will have them come off mute after I do their little bio and intro and answer a prompt for me. And the prompt that I'm offering for them to answer tonight is, what have you done to care for yourself this week in the lead up to Mother's Day? So I'm going to start by introducing Shelby. Shelby Forsythia is the author of Your Grief, Your Way, and Permission to Grieve, and she's the podcast host of Grief Book Review, Grief Seeds, and Coming Back Conversations on Life After Loss. After the death of her mother, Sandy, in 2013, she became a student of grief and set out on a lifetime mission to study the human experience of loss. And why I invited Shelby into this space is because Shelby was actually the first person to ever interview me for a podcast when I started doing this work years ago. And she instantly made me feel comfortable with what I was experiencing. And I believe that Shelby's ability to create empowering spaces to help all of us grieve is absolutely incredible. So I've seen Shelby consistently iterate on her approach to this work, the methods that she's using for this work, the channels that she is doing this work through, and I believe that she is truly and wholeheartedly committed to ensuring that we all have unconditional, I'm going to say it, permission to grieve. And so Shelby, I'm going to invite you just to answer my prompt. What have you done this week to care for yourself in advance of Mother's Day?
Oh my gosh, that's the nicest intro anyone's ever given me. Thank you so much. I'm a ridiculously overachieving student, so I'm going to give you three. The first is that I wore this jacket tonight, which is the last gift my mother ever bought for me. The second one is that I plan to schedule some workshops later this week, public facing, and I rescheduled them for the end of the month, so I don't have to do any work if I don't want to. And then the last one is that my partner and I are actually buying tickets to Susan's screenings of 140 pounds. So I'm really excited to watch that. I've never seen it before. It's been around in group spaces and I'm really excited to watch it.
Oh, how exciting. That's lovely. And a great transition. So I am going to introduce Susan. Susan Lieu is a Vietnamese American playwright, producer, and performer who tells stories that refuse to be forgotten, with a vision for individual and community healing made possible through the interplay of comedy and drama. Susan's work delves very deeply into the lived realities of body insecurity, grieving, and trauma. And the reason I invited Susan into this space today is because Susan was actually, this is really exciting. Susan's play was the first place that I sold my Dead Mom Club's pins to people in person. And when I saw Susan's play, which all of y'all can see this weekend, and in many screenings that she's doing, I watched her embody her mom in a way that I hadn't seen anyone else do. And I felt like Susan's ability to speak truths openly, very vulnerably, publicly, and while using humor, which I was like, y'all, we can laugh about this stuff. It's exactly the kind of modeling that I wanted to kick this series off with. And because it can be really hard to laugh about these things, I believe we need more of it. And so I wanted to invite Susan into this space. So Susan, what have you done this week to care for yourself?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll meet Shelby's three. I made veggie chili with my Instant Pot, so comfort food. I've said like no every single day on email to people. Just like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm still not going to do that. And I also started doing this thing called baby foot. It's like I have the worst, driest, ugliest, cracked heels ever. And my sister sent it to me, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna take care of myself after the baby's asleep. And then I just like soaked my foot, and I'm just like, I'm trying to take care of the stuff that's like gnarly, but like give myself space and permission to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's, I don't, what is this about? Just like the little things to our body. I put on Instagram earlier this week, I was like, I'm doing a face mask and I have to be proud of myself for this. And I think those little things to care for our physical body can just be so rewarding this week. So thank you for sharing, Susan. Naomi. Last but not least, I'm going to introduce Naomi. Naomi was moved to begin her journey in this space in 2014 after the death of her close mother figure. During that mother figure's dying process, Naomi unknowingly fell into the role of a death guide, and she provided safe, loving space for her mother figure to freely express her thoughts around dying. And Naomi sat vigil, held her hand, recorded her stories, and held space for the concerns of her family. And inhabiting that tender space with her mother figure was tremendous. And so wanting to provide that space and care for others, Naomi completed the end of life guide training with Going with Grace, assisted as a student guide, and trained as a hospice volunteer. And the reason that I invited Naomi into this space today is because we actually met after the murder of George Floyd last year, and we were brought into a conversation about Black lives, Black bodies, and Black grief. And I was instantly blown away by how tenderly Naomi holds space and the power behind every word that comes out of her mouth. And I wanted to invite Naomi into this space because I believe that her ability to guide people through life and death, like when I hear that she held her mother figure's hand at the end of her life, I'm like, that Naomi's who I would want holding my hand. And so I wanted to bring her into this space today. And Naomi, I invite you to answer the question again. What have you done to care for yourself this week?
Oh my goodness, just that's so much. I feel so overwhelmed by the opening. Thank you for those words. Continuing on with the trend, I guess I will also raise 3 as well. I said no a lot as well. I moved things around when I couldn't say no, and said like not now. And lastly, I let myself just be. I left myself alone.
Thank you.
How I was feeling or try to make it right or try to make it correct. Just let myself.
Yeah, I feel like that feeling of being able to just say, I'm just going to exist this week is also really fine. So thank you for sharing that. I think what I'm hearing with all of us is boundaries. And so I would love to start this conversation. We're going to have some questions from me to the group. I'm going to open it up to y'all to share, answer questions, talk about your experience and what you do. Again, that really, to me, our responsibility tonight is to model for people how they can care for themselves and what they can do. And then we'll open it up to the chat again. To anyone in the audience, any questions you have, let us know. But my first question that I'm gonna open up to the room is, why might Mother's Day feel particularly hard this year?
Well, I'm happy to go first. I mean, for me, I had a baby during COVID, and even though I've lost my mom 25 years ago, I still miss her. I still wish she was here. I wish she could tell me how to be a mom. So, I mean, I think it's really real. Like, I have a 1-year-old running around, or not yet running around, and I just wonder, like, am I doing this right?
Thank you, Susan. Shelby.
Yeah, that's hyper real. And I don't have children myself, so I want to acknowledge people who are attending as well who have kids. And there's like the motherless child, but then there's also having children without a mom to look up to. I think for me is something about energy has been coming up this year, especially. I think politically, socially, we have seen unveiled a massive lack of nurturing, especially here in the United States. And I know on Mother's Day, I long for nothing else but to be comforted and nurtured. And so to be missing that energy or to be deprived of that energy year round, but like Mother's Day is like when it's a siren alarm bell in my face, is like, you are not being nurtured. And look at all the other people who have people to nurture them, mother figures to nurture them. It's like, just massive sinking into sadness. And before I did grief work, and while I've done grief work, I've worked in the floral and restaurant industries, which are nurturing service industries. And so I would work on Mother's Day. And so to offer things that are beautiful to people or to offer food as nourishment to people has both been additionally triggering, but also a weird way I can inject myself into a nurturing process during Mother's Day. So it's weird to not be in either of those industries this year. But yeah, nurturing is gravely missing. Pun unintended and intended on Mother's Day.
I'll take it. I'll take it. I am curious to that point. We talked a little bit about the things that we're doing to care for ourselves. And I'm curious, when it comes to that nurturing, what is it like around Mother's Day to seek that from people in your community, to seek that from yourself? What are the ways that you figure out how to find it, if you can? And what sort of guidance do you have for people that are like, I'm not going to get it from my mom. I maybe don't have energy to give it to myself. How can I find that sense of support from the people around me?
I'm still kind of bad at it. So
I
it's
just was
kind
gonna
of
say
just
that.
like, I was like, I'm still kind of bad at nurturing myself. I was working with a one-on-one client the other day, and she kept kind of circling around this idea of struggling to find things that feel good again. And I asked her, I said, what if we shifted from trying to find things that feel good in the midst of grief, because that's hard AF, and shifted to things that felt safe? And so moved safe in the place of good. And so what feels safe? It's like people I can have really in-depth conversations with, a meal that I don't have to cook. So like ordering in is my favorite thing to do on Mother's Day if I can't go out to like a restaurant or something like that. Staying at home feels safe right now. And then predictable movies and television feels really safe. I don't watch anything that I haven't seen before on Mother's Day because you never know.
Too real, too real. Naomi, I'd love to hear, what it is that you're allowing other people maybe to do for you, or how you're bringing that community element in.
I piggyback off of what Shelby said. I am still very, I don't want to say bad. I will say that I'm still figuring that out. It's my second Mother's Day without my mother, as I mentioned before when we met up. And for me, I also want to acknowledge that when I say mother, I'm speaking specifically about my grandmother. I'd also just like to give voice and presence to those of us who maybe weren't raised by our biological mothers, those of us who maybe don't have a relationship with our biological mothers due to emotional, mental, spiritual reasons. That loss is still very real, even if the person isn't dead. They're just not present in our lives, and that can be equally as hard. So for me, I guess I've just been kind of stumbling through it because, again, my second year, like last year, it was just so acute and so painful. The pain kind of clouded out everything else. So I couldn't like step back and make a care plan or ask for help. I was just literally scraping by. And then the day showed up and I had all these plans of things I could do, and none of them happened. What ended up happening was that I bought some flowers. My girlfriend bought some flowers, and I sat at my altar and I stared at her picture and I cried for hours on end in my robe, and that was okay. So I think for me, I'm just figuring out that it's good to have sort of like a list of things that you can do if you find you have the emotional wherewithal to do them, and also know that if you do none of those things, it's still absolutely fine.
I really appreciate that, because I think for me, one thing that my husband and my partner has been really good about is like, okay, the list. It's like, here's the things we could do. If you wake up and you tell me to fuck off and you don't want to do any of them, that's okay. We're just gonna like eat French fries and stare at a wall. We can do that too. But sort of having that preparedness of, okay, there are options. They can be positive, they can be negative, they can involve crying, they can involve laughing and joy, whatever it is. That sort of like little bit of preparedness about what we might have capacity for can make it feel less scary, like we have to wake up and make a decision on the day. Susan?
Yeah, I would say take the offer. Take the offer. and someone was like, you really need to meet this person. And so it's like potentially new girlfriend, you know, I'm friend dating. And she was like, hey, I'm coming from Little Saigon. What do you want? And I straight up said, this dish from this place. And I listed 3 different dishes of what I wanted. And I said, these are just options, but this is actually really what I want. You get what I'm saying? Like, so if someone's going to put out a bid, fully take it without any shame or guilt around it or I need to clarify or qualify or whatever. It's just like, this is exactly what I want. And you're in choice to do whatever you want with that information. But I am fully in my 100% to ask for what I want.
I love that. I love just the concept of like accepting that when people offer something, you can take it from them. There's always that feeling and that pressure of like, they probably didn't need it. I don't want to be a burden. But if they put it out there, I'll take that food, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like that definitely speaks to the culture that a lot of us maybe have grown up in around grief, in that we don't want to be a burden, or we don't necessarily trust when people show up to support us that they actually know what they're signing up for, which makes sense because a lot of times we as the grieving people don't know what we're signing up for. So it feels just kind of like, you know, trying to figure out where you are and trying to help somebody help you. Because I also have that same problem of like accepting help when people offer it. I'm like, oh, do they really mean it? Do they know what they're signing up for by offering to help me? But also it's like trusting people to just know their own limits and me not having to police other people's limits.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like my husband was like, so I'm doing all these screenings for Mother's Day. There's a chunk of time. And he's like, so what do you want to have happen? And like, I have really high expectations. And if I don't actually say them, and then magically that morning isn't the way I wanted to, I'm going to be even in more sorrow. So in a way, I know it's like the onus shouldn't always be on me. But at the same time, if there's specific things I need, it's also like, I got to ask for it too, you know, because he doesn't know. Like my husband's never really had a loss before. And then so we have partners that want to support, but there is part of it like to help them too, because they don't have the empathy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's important, to acknowledge that if we have those safe people in our lives and those people who are going to offer and we know that we can take them up on it, it's such a special, incredible blessing to have that offering on the table, especially if you don't have capacity to cook that morning, like to have someone say, do you want me to make breakfast? Is really lovely. And if they're safely going to like do that for you in a way that is compassionate, that's amazing. And I have a couple questions for each of y'all, just specifically. And I think I'll start with Shelby. So you manage like groups, you have one-on-one clients, and I'm really curious, what is the number one question or issue or topic that you have people raise around this time of year, around Mother's Day, and how do you offer people guidance with your answer?
I think the biggest one is kind of really what we're covering here is, what do I do? Like, but really, what do I do with myself? And I think what's underneath that question a lot of times is, how can I manufacture this day so I'm not in pain? And I'm like, first we acknowledge that pain will inevitably come. What form it arrives in, we don't know. So it could be sitting at our altar for 3 or 4 hours in our bathrobe, crying, staring in front of a picture. It could also be seeing a screening of a play and having these twangs of pain, but then also laughing out loud when something really funny is said. So it's like, we don't quite know like what outfit pain's going to wear on Mother's Day. And so kind of seeing pain as this living being that we can interact with, but also knowing that it exists within a spectrum or a crowd of a host of other experiences and emotions that are going to also come up on Mother's Day. So things we've been talking about already of like, make a list of possibilities. They're not requirements of yourself, because again, give yourself permission to grieve and permission to not do things that you don't feel like doing. But also like, what outfit is Payne gonna wear? Because I think we all anticipate that Payne's gonna appear in like the very worst, like an executioner outfit with one of those big spiky balls on a chain and like whack the crap out of you, which is possible on Mother's Day. But also sometimes Payne is just like, I'm gonna ring your doorbell and run away. Like it's not always the same intensity every single Mother's Day. And so offering that kind of reassurance, but then also the practical, I need a list of possibilities. And if I do some of them, great. If I do all of them, great. If I do none of them, great. And just holding that space.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like the visual that you gave with that. And especially the ring the doorbell and run away. Sometimes when it just like pops up and then I'm here to like make this day really crappy and then to just disappear. And like you can have joy and positive moments and neutral moments after that, but to recognize that it takes all of these different forms and that we're definitely, I think a lot of us bracing for what could be the worst possible experience on Mother's Day. Susan, I have a question for you that is in reference to one of the comments that just came through the chat. And I just really want to hear your perspective on feeling laughter and joy and happiness and how people can sort of wrestle with that around this time of year.
Totally. I mean, so I have a comedy drama about how my mom died from plastic surgery malpractice when I was a kid. And that's what the One Woman show's about. I play 15 characters. And it is a place for us to release a lot, to go there, to grieve, and also to release. But I need to preface this all with, my mom died 25 years ago. And for almost 20 years, my family has never talked about her. They didn't talk about who she was, how she died. So I didn't actually really know my mother. And so for those 20 Mother's Days, I was numb. I pretended that day didn't exist. I went about my day. I actually avoided the day altogether. So having an event like this to actually directly acknowledge is so beautiful, because I think like that means, like for me personally, I'm in a new type of space. And because I've done this show about my mom and I've got to embody my mom and be my mom and learn so much about her, she feels more alive today than the last 25 years. And because I'm in relationship with her and I'm embodying her and being her and celebrating her and having a new way to honor her, now I've been able to create space for new emotions, where it's okay for me to laugh on that day, because actually I can be joyful about my mom now. It's not just the loss of her. Now I've created this new form of legacy for her, and I honor her in a really new way. But I gotta say that it really took me a lot of space and time, and also my journey to go find out who she was, because my dad and the rest of my family didn't want to talk about her because there was so much shame around her death. So I think there's that part of it too, is like, how does our loved ones who are gone, how do they live on in our family? What is our family's relationship to them? Because it was just my mom's birthday on April 30th, and I called my sister. I had a picture of my mom, and I lit some incense, and I lit a cheesecake, and I put it right in front of her with a candle, and I FaceTimed my sister, and I just like flipped the camera and I started singing happy birthday. But like there was nothing coming out of my throat because I'm just like crying. So, but now it's 25 years later that me and my sister can finally sing happy birthday to my dead mother. Whereas for the last 25 years, it was like, there was no singing, there was no acknowledgement. So I think there's something else also around family relationships, on if you have siblings or if you have a parent that was married to your mother or the person who passed, are you allowed to celebrate together? Are you allowed to grieve together? And we have to make space for that, because not everyone in their family has space for that. And everyone else is on their own grieving journey. So it's like a totally hot button issue. And so what I hope my play allows people to do is that at least you have space for you, and for you to feel that range and honor them and remember them in your own way. But not everyone in your family is in the precise exact place that you're going to be. And that's hard.
Thank you, Susan. Your play is so special. I think it reminded me too about the fact that we are not all in the same place. We all have different relationships to the person that we lost. We all have different ways of processing the grief. We all have very unique individualistic experiences with grief in general, but it is very layered when it comes to what interpersonal relationship we have with that person and with the people around us in community that are grieving their death.
Right. And I think I would advise everyone, you have total permission to be on that entire spectrum of emotions. And it's not like, oh, am I only being respectful if I'm sad? And I would invite you eventually over the years as they go by to just expand in that space and be with all the other emotions, because then you can be in each of them even more deeply.
Thank you. Naomi, my question for you sort of piggybacks off of this in the sense that it has to do with the ways that we relate to the people around us and find community in our grief. And so you host an event called Black Folks Grieve, and it is a space that you hold for Black people who are grieving to come together and talk and be with each other and experience their grief. And so I'm curious about what about sharing a grief experience with people that have the same background as you, that come from, maybe a similar community to you, who look like you, et cetera. Like, what is the significance of finding those communities and spaces, especially around a weekend like Mother's Day?
I think for me, where it came from, I started the group because after the death of my mom, I found myself really needing spaces to grieve in. And I started looking for grief groups, and I found some, but then I would go and it didn't feel right. And I think that BIPOC spaces are very, very important, but I also think that there's something equally important as the spaces where there is so much to say, but also so much you don't have to say. Like when I host Black Folks Grieve, it is Black people talking about grief and getting to show up exactly how they are without having to explain why they talk a certain way, why they do certain things, why, just having to explain, period. Like we get to just show up and be with each other. And then we also just really get to talk specifically about our grief and what that looks like and how that shows up. And a lot of the conversation is about the ways in which we haven't been allowed to grieve because there is so much collective grief. It's like my mom just died, and then I just saw, an instance of police brutality. And then on top of that, I'm also just dealing with being Black in this country. And all of that is grief. And all of that affects how we show up in the world. And all of that affects how the world then sees us. So I think, again, to answer the question, it's just so important to have spaces with people who share your similarities and also share your differences and share your struggles so that you can just show up and not have to think so hard. Yes.
Yeah, I think that thread in the work that so many of us do is about creating those spaces where people can meet like 5 steps toward the middle or in the middle, where it's like, I'm going to get so far. I don't have to tell you why you should not ask me what I would do on Mother's Day if my mom was alive. Like, I don't have to tell you that what you just said is inappropriate, or I don't have to tell you why I feel sad on a Tuesday for no reason in your mind. And being able to show up in these spaces and just not have to explain those pieces of ourselves based on whatever part of our identity it is, can take off pressure when we're already feeling enough pressure to grieve the right way or show up the right way. Kaylee, oh my gosh, I'm like, oh, grief brain. Kaylee, I'm curious if any questions have come through. You can shoot them over to me and I will send them out to the group. But I would love to open with another question to the group and to all of us. Obviously, we're still in a pandemic. Despite the fact that some places are opening up, some of us can grieve with our people over Zoom, etc. I'm really curious if there are ways that y'all would recommend or advise that people can honor their moms, celebrate their moms, and really care for themselves remotely, whether it's alone or with their people, if they can't see someone in person this year. I know most of us had to figure out how to do this last year with Mother's Day. So I'm just curious about maybe what worked for you last year and what maybe you're gonna do this year.
I had an edible. I got high and I just laid in the grass and I told my husband, I said, take care of the baby. He's like, what do you want for Mother's Day? I was like, I just want to get high right now. And I did. And, we, I think I was pumping at the time and made sure I threw out the milk, whatever. But it was more like, I got to a place where I just really needed to have exactly what I wanted. And I was alone. We didn't have brunch. It was okay, but like for me, I needed to be blissed out in that way. And I know it's not like, I don't know, like a sanitary, I don't know. It's not like the most like, I don't even know I'm not even gonna put a word to it. That's what I wanted. And that's what I got. And my second recommendation is like, there is something around water for me that still is just so magical. And so there's some water by a park here, and it's just like going to sit by the water, just watching the waves come in and out, and then the inevitability of the ebb and flow of life. Like it's so purifying to me, and it makes me feel, it just comforts my heart in a different way. So that's one thing that I'll be doing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think making that space to, like you said, not have to find the words, but say, this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. And then you do it. So thank you for sharing, Susan. I would not be mad about doing that on Mother's Day this year either. So
yeah, see, that's the word there. Maybe it's unapologetic. Like constantly we're always apologizing and justifying. And it's like, well, what if we just gave ourselves complete permission to have 100%?
Thank you. Shelby and Naomi.
I love that. I'm like, what if we weren't sorry for grieving? Oh, I just love the idea of that. Alicia, you and I actually did an event together last year. We did Motherless Mother's Day. And I actually interviewed the author Cheryl Strayed on Mother's Day about her book Wild, about the loss of her mom, Bobby. And nobody knows this, but I raced to that interview in between working at a floral studio. So I was like designing bouquets for Mother's Day, raced to do an interview for Cheryl Strayed, and then raced back to downtown Chicago to design more flowers. I essentially, last year in the midst of the pandemic, I was so like, I didn't get high. I got high in anxiety is kind of what happened. And so I do this thing when I'm anxious where I make myself move so much that I tucker myself out. It's like when kids have candy or something, and you just have to let them run around until they get tired and they fall on the floor and they sleep literally with their face in the carpet. Like that was what I did last year. And that manifested like starting the morning at the flower shop at like 8, 9 a.m. and then ending at 6, 7 p.m. And then with an interview that was emotionally exhausting. In between all of that, I was like, this is just how I'm going to do this day. And then I took the next day off. And so it was one of those things where it's like, I hesitate to use the phrase get busy because I think workaholism gets used to cover grief a lot of the time. But when it's done consciously, I'm like, this is actively how I'm working out my anxiety about not having a mom on the planet on this day. And also the consciousness of taking off the next day. So I'm really glad that you and I got to do Motherless Mother's Day last year. And again, another plug for Caregiving 2021 this year, which is the 2-month event that you're putting on.
Well, thank you, friend. I appreciate that. We did get a question in the chat that I want to raise. We have about 6 minutes left. And I'd love to answer this question because I think it is a reality for many people. The question is, what about those of us who are alone, who don't have people to grieve with? I'd love to open this up to any of you. Yeah, Naomi.
I'd love to speak to that. I feel lucky enough that I have a partner and I was able to spend most of the last year quarantining with them, so I wasn't alone. But I did find that there was a lot of processing and a lot of things I wanted to do alone by choice. So at least for me, what I found really helpful was journaling, which I know can be really hard when you're in that grieving space because grief brain and writing, but also voice memos where I didn't have to think too hard. And I literally just pressed record and would just talk for however long I needed to talk. One, because it got it out, but two, I also thought it was really important to have something to be able to look back on at some point when not to say that it wasn't so raw, but like at some point when I had the capacity to, I could look back and be like, this is what it was like. This is what this felt like. These were the words that I was grasping for. Walking, similar to Shelby, was really, really helpful for me, for those who are able to do that. Just moving my body and kind of grounding myself back in that was super important. And I found breath work really comforting. Like I just got really into like watching YouTube videos on like breathing exercises, because part of my grief experience that I just wasn't breathing correctly. I was holding my breath all the fucking time and so tense and wondering where it came from. And in those moments of just breathing, it was nice to have a minute to just be like, God, this is where it's all living. Like I can just breathe into it and give it some love and some space to be and show up. So yeah, and I would definitely recommend taking the time to, if you have the capacity to, maybe sit and make a care plan of what feels accessible to you. What are things that make you feel safe that you can do alone if you do need to? Because not only are a lot of us alone, as Susan chimed in with, not everybody is on the same wavelength grief-wise. So you might be looking for someone to grieve with you, and you might not be able to find them because they just can't. And that's valid, and your one is valid too. So yeah, those are really helpful for me.
Thank you. I think before we end today, so I want to thank everyone for joining us. To learn more about our guests, I'm going to have Kaylee throw a bunch of links and all kinds of stuff into the chat, but I want to end this with a question to each of you. And then I'm going to also have Kaylee, thank you for doing all this for us, throw, in response to what you were talking about, Naomi, with journaling, throw the link to a video from Nyla Francis on her Instagram, where she reads a poem and offers some reflections to any of us who are grieving our mom, thinking about our mom, et cetera, mother figure this year, and it offers some reflections to think about, write about, et cetera. But to close tonight, I just would love to have each of you tell us something that you either wish you would have heard from someone around Mother's Day, or something that you heard from someone that made you feel so absolutely taken care of. Because I think what's really important about this work, to me at least, is finding the words to articulate things that maybe other people haven't heard yet, can't find the words for, or needed to hear. So I want to offer that to everyone who's joined tonight. So I'll start, we'll go in the same order that I introduced everyone. So Shelby, Susan, and then Naomi, and we'll close tonight, and y'all will get links to everything, but I'd just love to hear a little bit from each of you before we go in this last minute.
I actually don't know that I have one. Not immediately accessible to me. So I'm actually going to stand by and receive from others today.
So I've been reading this Thich Nhat Hanh book about peace, and this is not the quote, I'm going to mess it up, but he said that the lotus flower cannot exist without the mud, and that flowers grow in mud, and you need garbage to have beauty. And for the longest time, like I felt like my mom's tragic loss was like the worst thing that had ever happened to me. And over time, I'm able to see how I've been able to learn a lot, and how her death has made me a lot stronger. And so I just want to offer to live in that dichotomy.
Thank you. Naomi?
I would offer two things. One of the most meaningful things someone ever said to me at Mother's Day was that biologically your grandmother didn't mean she wasn't actually your mother. Because I think a part of the loss, or part of loss that isn't addressed, is that if you're mourning a mother figure on Mother's Day who wasn't biologically related to you or anything like that, your loss is not as valid because it wasn't blood. And that's simply not true. Anybody that you have that tie to that is out of your life for whatever the reason may be, and you feel sadness about that, that sadness is completely valid, and it is your right to sit in it and be with it and process it. The other really wonderful experience that I had actually didn't involve words. I was house sitting for one of my best friends, and I was being nosy, and I was going up to look in her library to see what books she had gotten. And right outside of her library is a little altar table. And on the altar was my mom's funeral program. And the minute that I recognized it, I just completely broke down, and her doc was staring at me like, what is wrong with you? But it was just that moment of feeling so seen and so held without her actually knowing that I knew. It really just felt like somebody else saw that I was hurting for this person, and they, without words, were carrying that grief with me. And I will probably hold on to that for the rest of my life.
Someone said it in the chat, witnessing, holding that space, and just doing those little things behind the scenes, I think makes such a huge difference, whether we know that they're there or not. And I just want to say, on the flip side of that, it means the world to me that y'all joined me tonight to do this so publicly and vocally and openly. So I have to thank all of you for joining. I thank all of the guests for showing up. Like I said in the beginning, we will be sharing around a bunch of resources. We will share the links in the chat to all of our Mother's Day events that are coming up, and we'll share those in an email as well. So here's a long list of additional events that we're doing over the next couple of days, which is really exciting. And yeah, just thank you all for joining us. You will be able to see the replay, and we'll see you hopefully next month. We'll be talking about Father's Day, naturally. And I'm really excited to host that event and to see y'all in the future. So thank you, and take care this weekend.